In May 1940, the German army invaded France, and the British Expeditionary Force was driven back to the Channel coast. To help slow the German advance, A.T.A. pilots ferried aircraft out to frontline RAF airfields in Normandy, just days before the Allied evacuation of Dunkirk.
There was a call to take ferry battles out to France. This was when France was collapsing. But it was the first time I'd flown an aeroplane as big as a ferry battle. And we flew out to Châteaudun and landed. We were approached by the RAF flight sergeant and said, look, got 3 Hurricanes which we're going to burn because they're unairworthy. The engines work, but not much else. And if you'd like to fly them back, very welcome. Otherwise, the Germans will be here within 12 hours. So I was put into one. They put a loop of rope round the propeller, and he and another chap ran away as hard as they could, and the thing fired. I had no brakes, no hydraulics, and took off towards the sun. It was a thick haze, as I remember, and flying across the Channel was no horizon. Managed to land up with the Needles in the Isle of Wight and onto Whitewatham and landed. Slightly alarming landing because you couldn't put the flaps down except by pumping continuously. And of course, if you did that with one hand and you had to throttle the other hand, you had nothing for the stick, so you would dodge it around. But anyway, we got down in one piece.
With the defeat of France, Hitler's next target was Britain, and on the 10th of July, the Battle of Britain began. This was a critical time for the A.T.A., and pilots worked increasingly long hours to keep their overstretched RAF colleagues supplied with fighting aircraft.
One bomb could damage a lot of aircraft, put them out of action, and if they're going to try and, as they were trying to bomb the factories themselves, not only would they damage the factory and output there, but there are a lot of finished machines enough to equip a good many squadrons, just simply sitting there waiting to be used. And you must get them into the action, get to the maintenance units, have guns fitted, then they can supply the replacements for the squadrons, who I suspect were jolly short of aircraft then.
But despite the dangers of enemy aircraft, it was actually the unpredictable nature of the British weather that claimed most A.T.A. lives.
Yes, I think the weather killed a lot of people and got caught out and didn't get away with it.
One of those who didn't get away with it was the A.T.A.'s highest profile recruit, the celebrated pre-war flying ace, Amy Johnson.
It was in 1930 that Amy Johnson electrified the world by her daring solo flight to Australia. And this was only the beginning of a series of bold and brilliant efforts which justly earned for her the title of the world's greatest woman flyer.
Her solo flying achievements and the records set with her husband and fellow A.T.A. pilot, Jim Mollinson, meant that Amy was never out of the limelight. Her fame may have been good for A.T.A. publicity, but for her it brought many personal pressures.
She was old for that time. She was in her very late 30s, and she was very insecure, in my opinion.
And she was doing taxi work for us, you know, picking up 8 or 9 pilots, putting them in with their parachute, taking them to the next place, and then they would take off from there and so on.
On the 6th of January 1941, Amy Johnson set off on a flying mission to deliver an Oxford from Prestwick to Kidlington, but encountered thick cloud and low-lying mist en route.
Each pilot had an Oxford to take from all over England to go to Kidlington. Amy was bringing hers from Scotland in Prestwick, and she landed at Blackpool to get a weather report. And they said to her, well, it's bad here, but you know, you'll be all right.
Well, I myself am pretty sure that she just got above cloud. In bad weather, when none of us were flying, it was a really bad day. And once you get out of sight of the ground, unless you can find a hole to come down through to see the ground, you know, there's no way back.
She must have felt absolutely desperate, you know, there's no gap in the clouds, obviously not knowing where she was.
And I was on duty, it must have been 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and a message came through that I think it was an Oxford, I'm not sure, but had crashed in the Thames. And we chased around to find out who was overdue. And it was pretty obvious quite quickly that it was Amy Johnson.
I think she was in an Oxford, and you had to go to the back where the door was to get out of it. She managed to do that all right, but it was very cold, I think. And anyhow, the little naval vessel which went to pick her up, very difficult really to pick somebody up actually, you know, out of the water. And they really got a bit close, and she got sort of caught into the propeller, I suppose.
She really was sweet. I'd absolutely broke my heart when I heard she died. I feel like crying now.
News of Amy's death reminded A.T.A. pilots of the risks they faced ferrying aircraft across hostile winter skies.
In those days, there was no smoke abatement. In fact, the great thing was to produce as much muck as they could in the factories, so that the bombers, when they came over, couldn't see where to bomb. And we got far more fogs and sticky conditions, particularly in the Midlands, all around London for that matter, so that the conditions are ones that you wouldn't meet nowadays at all.
It was intense. I mean, you hardly ever saw a place like Sheffield, except if there was half a gale blowing. And so consequently, it used to mix in with the weather and pull the clouds down and so on. And a lot of the time, it was like flying inside a used milk bottle.
Poor weather conditions severely limited flying, leading to a backlog of aircraft which needed to be moved from the factories. Like sitting ducks on the tarmac, the Air Ministry was concerned they could be bombed before they'd even flown.
There was a cabinet minute passed that aircraft which were collecting and not being moved from Castle Bromwich, I think there were 200 of them, with 200 operational Spitfires was several squadrons. And a squadron was a very valuable unit in the RAF. I simply arrived then and was told to get the aircraft out of Castle Bromwich in particular.
From the top level we had orders that the Spitfires had to be moved. But you know, how we sort of did it without breaking our necks, I don't know.
With the end of the Blitz, the RAF went fully on the offensive, and the A.T.A. needed even more pilots to meet an increasing need to ferry bombers and fighters. In the next programme, we meet these new recruits and discover how the A.T.A. met the daunting challenge of training civilian men and women to fly every type of service aircraft, from fighters to huge four-engine bombers like Lancasters and Stirlings.
If we'd have had radio, we wouldn't have done it, because we'd have had outright interference. If you haven't got radio, they can't say no.